Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Indie Alaska is an innovative weekly web series capturing the diverse and colorful lifestyle of Alaskans. Real stories of everyday Alaskans at work and play. Supported in part by Alyeska Pipeline Service Company.
Cook Inlet Tug and Barge is a marine transportation company specializing in harbor services with a primary marketing focus on the Port of Anchorage, providing their customers with quality-based service specifically tailored to their needs.
The National Weather Service.
Good Wednesday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 24th of September. As always, we encourage you to be aware of your weather here in Alaska and any part of it. You can find information at weather.gov/Alaska or arh.noaa.gov. Give us a call on the weather info line at 800-472-0391. During the day, you can get more information in between the shows on Alaska weather and what you find on the forecasts there on weather.gov by going to Twitter, on Facebook, or on YouTube. If you'd been to our NWS Alaska Facebook page today, you would have seen some of the climate statistics and how we compared this summer and the first part of September to the climate records for different parts of Alaska. If you haven't seen that yet, you might want to take a look at that and then read the rest of the article that gives a more in-depth view of what's going on. Also posted some interviews there and statistics on Twitter, so make sure you check that out at NWS Anchorage, NWS Fairbanks, NWS Juneau, or if you want the whole view there from our statewide focus, NWS Alaska. So lots of ways to stay informed during the day. Looking out to the west, low pressure once again in the southern Bering Sea is drawing up Pacific moisture toward the Gulf of Alaska, but fighting that is an offshore flow pulling in some drier air across the western and central Gulf at this time. Numerous other trails of moisture are working their way up across the Kamchatka Peninsula and eastern sections of Asia, but right now our main focus will be watching what happens to the moisture here. We've got two storm tracks, one of those the southern branch of the jet stream that's working across the North Pacific right now, and the Arctic jet that's working across the northern half of Alaska. The separation of those two streams is keeping the main moisture feed well to the south while keeping cold air locked up in the north. So right now the pattern isn't terribly active. Out across the rest of Alaska, you can see moisture moving northward. I'll step out of the way here. Our low pressure system is a gale working its way toward Haida Gwaii, moving away from the Pacific Northwest. The occlusion continues to move northward with periods of heavy rain working toward Ketchikan and Annette, and probably some gustier winds that will gradually subside the further north it goes. You can still see it's running into plenty of dry air across the southern sections of the Yukon, and that is responsible from high pressure sitting up across the interior. That is working that air out across the northern Gulf at this point. It's been a little breezy around Cordova, out around the Copper River Basin. That too should be settling down in about the next day and a half. So look for some improvements there as the winds settle down out across the coastal plain. Plenty of clouds there and periods of rain and snow across the north slope with temperatures considerably cooler. In Fairbanks today, how about that chill? Temperatures were only in the mid-30s today thanks to high pressure sitting right on top of the middle Tanana Valley. Here's a look at the surface features. 1,017 millibar high out across the middle and eastern sections of the Yukon and the Tanana Valley. You can see the snow showing up in the satellite picture once again, and pockets of drier weather across the lower and middle Yukon. Out around Kotzebue, Shishmaref, areas of light rain were falling there inside of Kotzebue Sound. Some light snow around Prudhoe Bay and Deadhorse, with low pressure parked just to the north of Point Barrow at 1,001 millibars. 980 millibar low southwest of Haida Gwaii. That's working northward tonight, and as we go into later on tonight and tomorrow, notice that pressure difference here across southeastern Alaska is relaxing somewhat. It means the winds aren't going to be quite as fierce as they have been previously with the storm a little bit further to the south. At its present moment, though, it certainly is a gale. And across the southern Bering, 1,006 millibar high, not terribly strong, but enough to churn up some showers and light rain across the central and eastern Aleutians. And the ridge of high pressure here trying to establish its dominance out across the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta. What it probably means is we'll be dealing with many areas of fog out across the southern Bering and the west coast into parts of the interior and maybe even south central from time to time. Now out across the Arctic coast, light fog, snow, and a mix of rain and snow, or just drizzle out across the Kotzebue Sound region north of the Bering Strait. And further north, you run into that temperature difference that is beginning to change things over to a little bit more of a wintry situation. High pressure still sits across the upper Yukon by Thursday afternoon, and that is still pumping in some drier air out across the Gulf of Alaska. So south central, Kodiak Island, southwest still look to be relatively clear in the morning, and that means cold at this time of the year, but then fairly bright, clear, and blue in the afternoon. Out across the North Pacific now, our low pressure system has dropped right back over the Aleutians at 999 millibars. The pressure gradient out in front of that is short, but tightening up here. You'll notice that brief southerly flow working out across the southern Alaska Peninsula. Showers are found as far north as St. Lawrence Island and St. Matthew Island, and a light northerly flow is developing out across the central and eastern chain. Out across southeastern Alaska, our low pressure system is relaxing somewhat. Probably still a weak gale at this point, working toward Haida Gwaii. You can see the winds out across southeastern Alaska are also relaxing somewhat. There's still a pretty good chance for some light rain across more parts of Alaska now as that rain shield is spreading out toward Yakutat. High pressure is not winning southeastern Alaska anymore, but it still has control of a good part of the interior, which means another cold start for you Thursday morning. And certainly south central Alaska with snow showers still passing over the Brooks Range and the coastal plain. Now that diminishes as we get into Friday. A smaller area of snow showers still exists, let's say around Kaktovik into the eastern Beaufort Seacoast. Low pressure out across the eastern sections of Asia continue to work its way into the Bering Sea. The winds are picking up a little bit more on the western side of that, and south of the Alaska Peninsula, low pressure is still working its way into the Gulf, now cutting into what was previously controlled by high pressure, and clouds are overtaking the Kenai Peninsula and parts of the Anchorage Bowl and the Matanuska and Susitna valleys, as well as southwestern Alaska. But obviously, most of the interior and pretty much most of the lower and middle Yukon valleys, as well as the Noatak and Kobuk valleys, are still dealing with very dry air. So a lot of sunshine to be had for Friday. Southeast, though, still seeing some passing pockets of light rainfall across southeastern Alaska. Temperature-wise today, fairly mild day for southeast. Readings back in the mid to upper 50s, including Juneau at 58, 60 in Sitka, Net, Ketchikan, Craig, Klawock, all in the upper 50s. Beautiful day it looked like. 62 for areas in the Northern Canal around Haines and Skagway. Of course, all this mild weather, temperature-wise, wasn't the whole picture. If you counted in the storm that was moving its way northward, you're probably getting more wind and occasionally more rain. Some of that was heavy at times down around Heidelberg, it looked like, and maybe even into Petersburg. Out around Prince William Sound, upper 50s and lower 60s there. Valdez did okay today at 61, while the rest of the Kenai Peninsula and Prince William Sound were only in the 50s. Looked like Seward made it to 59, Homer 56, Anchorage, if you flew into Lake Hood today, only 52, 55 around Talkeetna and Squetna, 50 up around Glen Ellen, 43 in Northway, while Fairbanks was a chilly 36 compared to the mild and wet summer you saw this year. 39 degrees in Fort Yukon, 42 in Eagle, and further north, 28 for Anaktuvuk Pass after seeing some snow the other day. 33 degrees with about an inch of snow on the ground, still in Barrow, 36 in Kaktovik. Out across the Chukchi Seacoast, 37 for Wainwright, 41 out around Point Hope and Point Lay. On Kotzebue Sound, temperatures dropped into the lower 40s today. Shishmaref was 43, 42 in Nome with Unalakleet at 44. McGrath was showing 47 with Galena right around 43 degrees. Bethel was 48. As you get into southwestern Alaska and Bristol Bay, temperatures were a little bit milder still, back in the mid-50s. In fact, King Salmon was a mild 57 degrees, with the Pribilofs holding in the lower 50s. Not much change there. Lower to mid-50s for Sandpoint, Cold Bay, and False Pass, with 52 in Atka. Adak was 52 and 53 in Shemya. Now, overnight low temperatures will be the coldest under that clear sky you have in the interior, with most areas in the lower to mid-20s. Fairbanks may hold at about 28 degrees, but look at Northway and Eagle, mid to upper teens tonight. Yeah, hopefully you've got enough wood there for the early season, early part of the fall to stay warm with that, because it's going to be a chilly night there for Arctic Village as well. 17, 28 around Barrow. Most of the Seward Peninsula will drop into the 30s, including Norton Sound. Bethel's looking at 41, St. Paul 47, and upper 40s for most of the chain and the Alaska Peninsula, although a little bit cooler around Bristol Bay with temperatures still above freezing, but only in the mid to upper 30s. Kodiak 43. South Central is looking at overnight lows in the upper 20s and lower 30s once again. And southeast, expect lows in the upper 30s to as high as the lower 50s in the southern sections there. Again, that's controlled by the heat coming in from the storm to your south. High temperatures tomorrow will range from the upper 50s to about 60 in southeast. South central, Probably lower to mid 50s for most areas though, but skies should be pretty clear. 55 in Kodiak. The interior, including Fairbanks, in the upper 40s and lower 50s. So the nice thing is, at least with a little bit of sunshine and the dry air we have, the temperature range can go up and down pretty quickly. That's not such a great thing at night, but during the day you get a little bit of that nicer part of the deal. Across the Brooks Range and the Arctic coast, temps will make it into the upper 30s and mid 40s there, the warmer temperatures that I mentioned, probably around Ambler and Bettles. Around the Chukchi Seacoast, expect highs in the lower to mid 40s. Right on target there at Shishmaref, 45, 47 in Nome and Unalakleet, and Bethel expecting a high of 53 degrees with the Pribilofs right around 50. Flying weather will be hit and miss out across the west coast. You can see that very leading edge of MVFR conditions will just be touching parts of the coastline. So places like Amonic and maybe Newtok out toward Cape Newingham might be flirting with MVFR on and off throughout the day. Now north of the Brooks Range, out across Kaktovik westward toward Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse and Barrow, you're probably looking at IFR conditions by the afternoon. With IFR across the western chain, parts of Unalaska and Dutch Harbor to the Pribilofs, and then south and west of Haida Gwaii, a wide area of IFR with the storm system slowly sneaking northward. That's also going to spread MVFR northward, but not quite to the Chilkoot and White Pass area, and probably not quite to Juneau during the day, and most of south central and the interior should be VFR. So your pass conditions in the north are likely going to be MVFR through most of the day, but you could run into IFR the further north you go from Anaktuvuk and Adigan Pass throughout your Thursday. As we just saw, Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, as well as Rainy and Windy Pass, should all be VFR throughout the day. Beautiful flying day for Isabel Pass and Mentasta Pass. Probably not a day to be missed, but the morning is going to be a cold start out that way. Tanita Pass, VFR conditions are expected. Portage Pass should be okay, a little bit breezy, but those winds are starting to die off quickly. And Chilkoot and White Pass should be VFR. To your south, though, MVFR conditions should be expected. Freezing levels show that cold air overtaking a large chunk of Alaska. Look at that. And then out across the Bering, you see the levels as high as 2,000 and 4,000 feet in the north, and then quickly rising to 6,000, 8,000, and even 10,000 feet just south of the Aleutians. Across most of southeastern Alaska, you're looking at levels between 6,000 and 8,000 feet, and then north of Haines and Skagway, all the way over through Prince William Sound and just south of the Wrangell St. Elias region and the Chugach, you're looking at levels right around 2,000 feet. Icing potential with the storm moving northward is going to be pretty high up there, so above 9,000 feet for most of southeastern Alaska. There will be some pockets of occasional moderate icing with that. Probably some ice below 10,000 feet that could be light to isolated moderate with a wave of low pressure working over aloft and south of St. Matthew to the Pribilofs and across the eastern Aleutians below 14,000 feet but above 6,000 feet. There's a threat for some light to occasional moderate icing, as well as an area to the west of St. Lawrence Island and the Gulf of Anadyr below 12,000 but above 2,000 feet. Most of mainland Alaska should not have a major icing issue tomorrow. The jet stream, like I was saying, has two kind of split flows right now. The southern branch of the jet is really controlling the activity, and that big wavy pattern has two areas of low pressure right now. One of those is working northward from the Pacific Northwest, and that's controlling the surface storm heading for southeastern Alaska. This eventually will get pulled off to the east. This storm across the southern Bering Sea is working its way northward and will likely rotate back around. But the storm energy and the cold air is locked up north, so we don't see a big plunge of cold air dropping southward. Sure, it's cold in the morning, but that's mainly due to the sun angle and the dry air sitting across the region. So until we have Pacific moisture meeting up with some colder air, a pretty decent fall storm at this point isn't on the books, not just yet. At 9,000 feet, you can see that broad westerly flow working across the coastal plain. High pressures in command across St. Lawrence Island and Norton Sound with light winds in the interior as a result. Light winds coming ashore now across south central, those only around 10 knots, and for southeast, south and easterly wind with a gale at the surface coming in from the south. Low pressure across Unalaska and Dutch Harbor is guiding in winds around 30 knots or so from the south and west, and a light westerly flow across the western Aleutians is met with a little bit more of a northerly flow at 3,000 feet. You can see low pressure around Nikolsky with winds up to the Pribilofs around 25 knots from the south, and high pressure also just south of Nome, guiding in very light winds across south central and southwest, about 5 to 10 knots. They pick up as they move out over the Gulf and south and west of Castle Cape and Kodiak Island. Low pressure with that gale at the surface is still working northward here. You get more of an east and northeasterly flow west of Sitka, around 25 knots. At this level, though, wind speeds are fairly light out across the Dixon entrance, only about 5 knots there. So again, not a huge issue with that. However, when you put it all together, looks like with speed shear and some different wind patterns, you might run into some occasional moderate around the Dixon entrance, Haida Gwaii, and southward. Below 4,000 feet, you're going to have some issues there. From Unalaska, Nikolsky, and westward, or eastward, I should say, to False Pass and Cold Bay, below about 4,000 feet. With that wave of low pressure moving eastward, watch for some chop with that. And across the coastal plain below 4,000 feet, especially north of Barrow, you might run into some occasional moderate, but most areas there around the Beaufort and Chukchi Seacoast and southward toward Anaktuvuk Pass, probably just looking at some light chop. That's a look at your aviation forecast. I'll be back with your Sea Ice Edge update and, of course, your marine weather forecast. Stay tuned.
Hi, I'm Mr. Bale. One of the nicest things about this business is the fact that you meet so many great people and become really good friends over the years. And it just happens that Mr. Bale is one of those people who I consider one of my great friends. Mo is from Transport Canada. He never turns us down unless he's got a conflict in a schedule. And we've had him up here, excuse me, several times. We always just enjoy him thoroughly. And with that, I'll say welcome back again, Mo.
Well, thank you very much, Jenny. Very kind introduction. It does kind of set a pace that may be difficult to keep up with here, but we'll do the best that we can. It's gratifying to see so many faces in the group today. Nice for pilots to all get together and share ideas, I guess. I better get some electronic wizardry started here and remind me not to look into that light again. Wow. My name is Mo Bale. I'm what they call a regional aviation safety officer. When you work for the federal government in Canada, you get called a lot of different things, okay? Believe me. But I'm going to accept Mo, so you can just call me that if you like, and I would appreciate that. Now, the regional aviation safety officer, the region that I'm specifically tasked with developing and presenting programs such as this, is not unique, but there's a reason why I'm here, and one of those reasons is that my region borders on Alaska. It also borders on Montana, and I do similar programs for them in the lower 48. The region is bordered by the Alcan Highway, okay, so that it falls entirely within my region. That's one of the ways that it's set up geographically. So I cover all of the province of Alberta, the western half of the Northwest Territories and the Arctic, all of the Yukon Territory, and a little northeastern corner of British Columbia. They like to think of themselves as being Albertans anyway. And we do too. They're pretty good. Now the branch that I work for in Transport Canada is called the System Safety Branch. We used to be called Aviation Safety Programs, but because of some changes to the, not specific duties, but some additional requirements of our branch within, they found that the name System Safety was probably defined our duties just a little bit more accurately. The closest liaison that I have is exactly with Joel Wilcox with safety programs with the FAA. That's a very close comparison. The mission that I have is similar as well, and it's a mission that's probably shared by most pilots, actually, whether you think of it that way or not. And it's to actively search for safety hazards and develop programs of accident prevention. I have a lot of people helping me to do that, people inside the department and people outside the department as well, the sharing of information, if you would. The presentation tonight deals with safety. It deals with judgment, primarily pilot judgment. So that's where the focus is going to be. But to begin with, I'd like to put up a definition of safety, where the responsibilities lie, if you would, that it is in fact the responsibility of the flight crew, and more specifically, and in most cases, the pilot in command. The definition here infers that there's a skill requirement, that as a skilled pilot gains experience through the years, their ability to exercise good judgment will increase. And that's true. I concentrate on judgment and the decision-making type of thing, judgment being the key element in the decision-making process, but not to the exclusion of attaining and maintaining a very high degree of skill in your chosen field, your endeavor. The stick and rudder skills, all the other skills that go along with flying an airplane must be there first, and then you use those as a basis to make good judgments. Occasionally, and when I say occasionally, it's rare, but it happens, that pilots will use the word judgment as an excuse for not maintaining a high level of skill. You really cannot trade one for the other, if you can get my understanding. You have to attain and maintain that high level of skill first. So please do that and ensure that it's there as well. And then, with experience, judgment becomes better. It's important for us as pilots to recognize that there's a very delicate balance that exists in our recreation or our field of career or whatever else it may be. Are there some professional pilots in the crowd, or pretty well all general aviation? Is there a mix? Who flies for a living? Couple? Anybody fly helicopters? Anybody a rotary wing pilot? Joel? Huh. Sit up front so I don't have to talk loud. Okay? Yeah. Now, I hate to make jokes about helicopter pilots. They have enough trouble, don't they? All those moving parts. Holy cow.
More on that tomorrow. Here's a look at the sea ice edge, and you'll notice offshore we're still dealing with a pretty expansive ice pack that's about 120 to about 80 nautical miles northeast of Barrow and Kaktovik. However, this leading edge is freezing very quickly, and there's also, of course, some fresh water freezing along the coastline there. So a lot of changes happening now that we're into fall and losing the daylight hours rapidly, and of course colder air setting in. You can check the latest updates from the sea ice team for Alaska at weather.gov/Anchorage/ice.php. On to the marine weather forecast now for southeast. We're still looking at more of a northerly flow coming through the Lynn Canal, 35 knots with a 7-foot sea. The seas drop off to about 5, even 3 feet the further south you go into the Clarence Strait. You're looking at an offshore flow all the way from the Dixon entrance northward through Sitka up toward Yakutat, from 15 knots in the north to 30 knots in the south, remembering that we have a gale just to the south of Haida Gwaii. Friday, the winds diminish a little bit more across the inner waterways, with the exception of the Lynn Canal. Everything drops off to about 10 feet. 20 knots, or 10 knots, I should say, 20 knots in the north. We'll get that right. 2 to 4 foot seas there across the inner waterways, with an offshore flow around the coast from 15 to about 20 knots, 7 to 8 foot seas in the north, and you're looking at about similar conditions south of Sitka to the Dixon entrance on Friday. Now across south central Alaska, a light northerly flow is keeping the sky clear, and the seas pretty flat in some cases. 2 foot seas in the north, 4 foot seas a little bit further south as you head south of Kenai toward Homer, and then 3 to 5 foot seas west of the Barrens into Shelikof Strait. A light and variable flow outside of Resurrection Bay, with a 4 foot sea in the western and northern Gulf, and light northerlies inside of Prince William Sound. Should be a pretty good day with a 2 foot sea there. For Friday, light northeasterly flows inside of Prince William Sound. Those come up to 20 knots from the east across the Gore Point area and into the Kenai Peninsula. And the Barren Islands, 25 knots coming in on the east side. Northeasterlies on the west side of the Barrens with an 8 foot sea, and 30 knots on either side of Kodiak Island with a 9 to 10 foot sea, and light northerlies continue in the northern canal. Across the Alaska Peninsula, light northeasterly winds inside of Bristol Bay, a southeasterly flow coming into Castle Cape and to Sand Point. 4 to 6 foot seas there on the Pacific side, 2 to 4 foot seas on the Bering side. Those winds come up a little bit more on Friday, 25 to 35 knots, 4 to 11 foot seas at their highest point, and easterlies at 30 knots with 10 to 11 foot seas on Friday across the Pacific waters. Across the Aleutians, a westerly flow coming into Shemya and Adak and Kiska with a 20-knot wind there. They become a little bit more northwesterly, heading around Adak and Atka with 4 to 7 foot seas there. The winds kind of split the difference here, west of Nikolsky to Adak, and then easterlies to Unalaska on either side. And Nikolsky, 25 knots in the north, 30 knots in the south with 6 to 10 foot seas building in as we go through Thursday afternoon. As we get into Friday, the winds come up even more from the north and the west, 30 to about 40 knots on either side, 7 to 10 foot seas in the central and eastern chain, and you're looking at 9 to 12 foot seas across the Pacific waters, with a return flow now across the western chain from 7 to 9 feet and south and easterly wind at 25 knots. That's for Friday. Across the west, look for a southerly flow around St. Lawrence Island, south and easterly winds from St. Matthew down to the Pribilofs with a 5 to 6 foot sea. Easterlies coming off the YK, and it looks like north of Nunivak Island, and south it doesn't look a whole lot different. 15 knot winds with 3 to 4 foot seas there. By Friday, a little bit more of a northeasterly shift, 20 to 25 knots, 4 to 6 foot seas are expected. Northerlies across the Pribilofs with a 6 foot sea, and St. Lawrence Island you're expecting a southerly flow at 15 knots with more of a 3 foot sea as we get in through the day. For Thursday, a broad westerly flow sweeping across Barrow and the Beaufort Seacoast, about 20 to 25 knots with 4 to 6 foot seas in the region. We're going to have to watch for some freezing spray not only Thursday, but probably more likely on Friday. Northerlies across Point Lay and westerlies coming into Cape Lisburne and Point Hope, with Kotzebue Sound expecting lighter winds at 15 knots with a 3 foot sea. Now, there's the freezing spray issue. Notice that north and easterly shift that's coming around high pressure, which means it's dropping in some colder weather. A southeasterly flow coming off the coast, 15 to 25 knots with 4 foot seas, and southerlies inside of Kotzebue Sound with a 3 foot sea for Friday. Recapping tonight's weather, a weak wave of cooler air is sweeping across the Arctic coast once again. That's going to keep the chance for some fog and flurries going at elevation and a little bit south and west. Expect that to mix in a little bit more with some drizzle or perhaps a mix from time to time. Light rain or showers across the southern Bering Sea to the Pribilofs should be expected, with low pressure at 1,006 millibars, and our gale, probably the headline of the day, working its way northward toward Haida Gwaii, bringing in some pockets of moderate to occasionally heavy rain and some occasional gusts. That'll probably be more of an issue for aviators than people on the ground. For Thursday, high pressures in command of a lot of dry air across the interior and south central and southwestern Alaska. Our gales moving northward. Showers are working into the west coast, and there's still a few snow showers in the north. By Friday, a lot of that's fallen apart, and showers are drying up across the northern coast. Thanks for watching.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
It's never too early to set expectations and goals for your child's education. The UA College Savings Plan provides opportunities that can help you reach your educational savings goals. Save in Alaska. Study anywhere. There is more information available by calling 1-888, the number 4, and then Alaska. This message sponsored by the UA College Savings Plan.